3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. It is the final week of February. February has been a crazy month. I think by the time we greet March, we'll have over 40 live connections this month. And February is one of our favorite months because for the last 10 years, we've focused February on featuring incredible women in science, exploration, adventure, and conservation from all over the world. We do this because February 11th is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. So we like to celebrate that all throughout February. And we have had such a great multitude of events that have taken place. In fact, this week, I think we still have something like 10 more live events to go this week. So if you visit exploringbytheseat.com, you will find all the live events we have coming up. You can register to tune in live, tune into the recordings afterwards. Either way, we'd love to see your classrooms hanging out. So today's event is a good one. We actually have a couple events back to back today. But to start us off, we're going to talk a little bit about Parks Canada and shipwreck exploration with Brandy Lockhart. So she is an underwater archaeologist. Her work has taken her to explore some of Canada's most iconic shipwrecks, including the Erebus and Terror wrecks of the Franklin expedition in the Arctic, as well as wrecks in the St. Lawrence, Sable Island, and Red Bay off of Labrador. So 30 years of diving experience. She's logged an incredible amount of dives. And today we're going to get to share in some of those stories. So I'm going to grab Brandy from backstage right now. Here we go. Hey, Brandy, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's great to have you with us. As a diver myself, there's nothing better than getting out into the water. I'm more Ontario, so a lot of the shipwrecks in the Ontario region. But yeah, we're thrilled to have you and excited to learn a little bit more about what you get up to.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll open up the presentation here.
All right. Perfect.
Okay. Everything's working.
Looks good.
All right. So hi, everybody. My name is Brandy Lockhart, and I am an underwater archaeologist. I work with the Parks Canada Underwater Archaeology team, and our team has existed for approximately 60 years, and it's our job to find, identify, study, and to protect Canada's underwater archaeology sites. So we work on a lot of different types of sites, and I'll go over some of those and some of the tools that we use in this presentation. But first, let's talk about what is underwater archaeology. So underwater archaeology kind of started a long time ago, not to study things, but it actually started when shipwrecks would happen and people wanted to try and get the valuable goods off of those shipwrecks. So this picture, originally when people started going underwater, they would go down holding their breath. It didn't give them a lot of time. They couldn't get very deep. But eventually, in 1832, the diving helmet was invented, and that started diving as we know it today. And you can see in this picture here, I can get my little pointer going. Here we go. There's the diver, and he is wearing a dive helmet. And the air is actually being pumped from the surface down this tube to the diver, so he could breathe underwater. That allowed people to stay underwater longer. And eventually, over time, people started realizing, maybe we could actually learn a lot from shipwrecks and from sites that are underwater. We could actually learn about people from the past. And over time, people realized that these sites are actually very valuable for knowledge, not just what they contain. And also over time, technology improved, allowing people to get underwater for longer. This picture is a very early picture from 1854. It actually shows somebody studying an underwater archaeology site wearing a really early dive helmet. So our team, as I mentioned, works on a lot of different sites all over Canada. And some of those sites are actually locations that used to be on land, but over time, for different reasons, might have actually been flooded with water. And areas like that, we tend to find a lot of Indigenous sites. So we found underwater Indigenous sites that can be hundreds or even thousands of years old. And this picture shows a pot and some stone tools that we actually found in the Trent Severn waterway. Some of the other sites that we sometimes look at could include piers and jetties, areas where ships used to actually tie up to, or old dams. And these would have been built with something called cribs, which are basically wooden squares filled with rocks underwater. And you can see one here next to the diver. Some other examples of sites that we might find underwater could include even bridges and old structures. This particular bridge was actually from the Rideau Canal in Ottawa. They built it in order to help build a dam. When they were done building the dam, they flooded the area and they didn't bother to remove the bridge. They just covered that whole area with water. So now it looks like this. We're able to find that and to record it. We've also worked on airplanes. Not something you see very often in the water, but it does happen. This is a diver actually studying and recording an airplane. You can see here, the diver's got a slate, which is basically just a board, and we put special underwater waterproof paper on there, and then he can just record the site using a pencil. You can imagine when we're riding underwater with really thick gloves, it's not very neat. It's not very tidy. So we always have to take those notes back and we have to redo them on the surface when we're done. And we also do drawings underwater. Also not the neatest because we have those big thick gloves on. But we're fortunate enough to have an illustrator on our team. We can give our illustrator all of our photos and videos and all of the images that we drew underwater. And she takes those and she can make pictures like this painting that she did here of that airplane. You're probably looking at that and thinking, it doesn't look like an airplane. But that's because it's upside down and the wings are actually underneath of the sediment. Sometimes in the past, people weren't as careful with getting rid of the old things they didn't want anymore. And unfortunately, sometimes they would just shove things into the water. So sometimes we'll find things that are thrown out in the water that are now archaeological sites, like this boiler. And of course, the big thing we work on most of the time, and what most people think of when they hear underwater archaeology, shipwrecks. So this is a picture of a shipwreck in Tobermory. I'll show you a couple more pictures of that. These are also from Tobermory, and you can see there's a giant anchor here on the bottom. And this image was taken from a drone in the sky. And the water in Tobermory is very clear, so you can actually see the divers right through the water. Most of the time when we find shipwrecks, they tend to be flat, like the one in this picture. They're broken open and lying flat in the bottom. But sometimes we actually find shipwrecks that are still sitting upright, intact, with their decks still in place on the wreck, like this example. So now we'll talk about some of the tools that we use to do our job. Because we work a lot underwater, we have a lot of fairly unique tools that help us to do that job. First and foremost, because we're out in the water, we need boats. So this is the Parks Canada ship, the RV David Thompson. And this ship, we use it to help us find archaeological sites, to get to remote archaeological sites like in the Arctic. And we can also sleep on board this ship if we're somewhere far offshore where maybe there isn't anywhere else to sleep. Then we have other boats. This is our boat, the Investigator. And this one, not only can we use it for surveying and finding sites, but we actually dive off of the back of it. So when we're looking for an archaeological site, especially shipwrecks, we're often looking in a really big area. And a big area, you want to cover a lot of that area as fast as you can. And putting divers in the water, that takes takes a lot of time for us to swim around and cover a whole area. So we have specialized tools that help us see what the bottom of the ocean or the lake or riverbeds actually looks like. This is one of those tools. This is a side scan sonar system. And what this does is we'll put that in the water behind our boat, and it actually sends out on both sides an acoustic, like a sound signal. And those sound waves travel through the water and they hit the bottom and they bounce back and go back to the towfish. And it actually creates a picture of what the ocean floor or the lake bed looks like. And this is one of those pictures. So this is actually a shipwreck that we discovered using side scan sonar. And here is the outline of the shipwreck. And what you're seeing here in the middle is what's left of the upper or the top deck. So here's another one. This is actually a wreck called the Neebing. And we happen to have a photograph of what the Neebing looked like before it wrecked. And in the photograph, you can see that it had a crane. And that crane is still visible in the side scan sonar image. You can see the smokestack here. Well, that's over here in the image. And this is the outline of the shipwreck. So another tool that we use, which is kind of similar, it's called a multi-beam echo sounder. And we can set this one up on both our small boats, and there's actually one that's right in the hull of our ship. And what it does is it also sends out sound signals, but just hundreds and hundreds of them all at once, every second. And those sound signals come back. They don't just give us a picture of the bottom. They actually give us a three-dimensional model that on our computers we can turn it around and rotate it and look at different angles, and we can take measurements. And this is one of those multi-beam echo sounder images. This is a wreck called the Mary McLaughlin. And on this picture, the darker colors, the darker blue is actually deeper, and the bright red, that's actually sticking up out off of the deck of the ship. And the green here, that's the upper deck of that ship. So this is another one. And this was a little bit more difficult to kind of figure out what we're looking at here. But this is a shipwreck that is actually on its side. So the front of the ship is here. This is the side. And remember I mentioned that we have an illustrator who can take all of our pictures and videos and drawings and make it look really nice for us. Well, she did this drawing for us, and that is the exact same wreck. So this is the front here. That's the bow. That just gives you an idea of all of the data that we collect and how we can process that data and make these really nice pictures. So once we find a site, we want to get in the water and have a good look at it. And there's a few different ways we can do that too. One of them is using remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs. We have, I think, 4 of these right now in different sizes. This yellow one here is our bigger one, the Falcon. It's got 2 cameras, a video, a still camera. We can put lights on it. We can put a multi-beam echo sounder on that ROV and then send it down to a shipwreck to record the wreck. We have smaller ones as well. The little black one that we see here is significantly smaller. And that is very helpful because those little ROVs, we can actually send them inside of a shipwreck through small openings that maybe a diver can't fit through, or maybe it's just not safe for a person to go inside, but we can send this vehicle in. What that allows us to do is to find really interesting things inside of the shipwreck. This is an example. So this drawing here was actually drawn in 1845, and it shows the inside of a cabin on a particular ship called the Erebus. We were able to get, the Terror. We were actually able to get a ROV inside of the Terror, and we were able to find that same bed. So here you can see the scroll work in the drawing is here in the bed, and there's the desk beside it. Also in the wreck of the Terror, we were able to get into some of the storage areas. And in there you can see the bottles still on the shelves inside of those storage areas. And we can do that thanks to the ROV. This is a picture of some of our other underwater tools that we use. These are cameras. This is our camera here. It's actually just a regular camera that you'd use every day, but we put it inside of what we call a housing. Basically, put it inside of something that is waterproof to keep the camera safe. Then we can take it down and take photos. I imagine a lot of people know exactly what this is because a lot of people have these now. That's a drone, and we can take pictures from the air through the water to find shipwrecks or to record shipwrecks. This one's interesting. This little camera goes inside of this housing to keep it waterproof, and it's what's called a 360 camera. So we can swim around, take images, video or photo of a wreck site, and what it does is it actually makes a picture like you would see on Google Street View. So once we have this, we also want to get people in the water if we can. And we have two different ways to do that. We have two different types of diving. So this picture shows two divers getting ready to get in the water, and they're on what's called scuba diving. In scuba diving, all the air that you have is on your back. So it's in this tank on your back. You can see we have a little one, and then we have a larger tank here. And you can go underwater for, depending on how deep it is, maybe an hour. You have enough air on your back for about an hour. And you have to kind of pay attention to that and come up whenever you get low on air. Another thing that we wear that is really helpful, especially in Canada, because we have very cold waters here usually, is what's called a dry suit. So those big red suits that the divers are wearing, they actually keep the water out. So underneath you can wear long johns and fuzzy warm layers of clothing to keep you nice and warm. And you can also put a little bit of air inside the suit, just as insulation. And then your hands stick out of the sleeves and your head out of the neck hole. You might be thinking, if there's a hole for your head and there's a hole for your hands, how waterproof can this really be? How much air can this actually hold? And how does that stay in? Well, you can actually pump this up full of quite a lot of air, and it'll hold a lot. It's shown here in this picture. We don't actually dive with that much air in this suit. That was just for fun, but it goes to show you how watertight these suits actually are. So the other type of diving we do is called surface supply diving. Surface supply, all of our air is actually coming from the surface. We have great big tanks and we can make air. So it's almost like having an unlimited amount of air. So we can go a little deeper, or if we're in shallow water, we can stay a lot longer. Another great thing with the surface supply setup is that we can wear these nice black suits that actually have hot water running through them. So it keeps you really nice and warm underwater, and you can turn the heat up or down, and it's like you're swimming in a hot tub. It's fantastic. Now, when we're doing surface supply, we need a lot more equipment. So this is a chamber that we have at one of our work sites where we run all of that equipment. And we have a dive supervisor. Here's Joe, one of our supervisors. And he can actually see how much air the divers are breathing, how long they've been underwater, how deep they are, and he's able to see what we're seeing because we have a camera on our head, and he can see everything that's going on. So this is a picture of somebody in a full surface supply suit with the big heavy helmet, just to give you an idea of what all of this weighs, because it's a lot of equipment that we get in the water with. You got the suit. Depending on the suit, it could be 10 to 15 pounds just for what you're wearing. Then you got your helmet or your mask. A mask is pretty light. That one could be 5 pounds, but if we go with the helmet, that is actually up to 35 pounds on top of your head, not your shoulders. Your head has to actually hold that up. Then we wear tanks. As you saw with the scuba, we'll wear 2 tanks for that. So that can be up to 60 pounds. And for surface supply, you only have to wear one smaller one. So could be up to 40 pounds. Now, even with all of this weight, it's not heavy enough to keep us down. So we have to add weight to our belts. And we add 10 to 15 pounds depending on the person. 20 to 40 pounds depending on the person. And then your feet float. So we add another 6 pounds to our feet, and that gives us over 100 pounds of weight to go in the water. But as heavy as that is, do you remember when I was talking about the diving helmet and those older style dive suits that people used to wear? Those suits were 170 pounds. And that's a picture of one of my colleagues, Joe. He had the chance to try one of them out. And he's down under the water dancing in his 170-pound suit. So we get to work in a lot of different areas in Canada. Because we work for the federal government, we work all over Canada's national parks, national historic sites, and the national marine conservation areas, which means that we're lucky enough to be able to work in the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Arctic Oceans, as well as a lot of our lakes and rivers in Canada. And I'll show you some pictures from some of the sites that we work on. Start with this one. This is a picture from the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror National Historic Site, which is located in the Arctic. Normally we work here in the summer, but sometimes we'll go out in the spring. And in April, because it's in the Arctic, there's still 6 feet of ice over top of the wreck sites. And we can actually set up a campsite over top of that, which is shown here. And we'll have 3 tents. One tent is the kitchen tent. We'll prepare all of our food, eat in there. One tent is the sleeping tent. We all have to share one tent for that. We get like cot bunks set up and live in there. And the other one is the science tent. And that tent will actually cut a hole through the ice so that we can access the shipwreck. And here's another image of our camp setup. We can actually, and have in the past, sent divers down through the ice to study the shipwreck, or sometimes we'll just use it for ROVs. And in this picture, just wanted to show you exactly what you have to wear when you want to go out and work outside in the Arctic in April. It's actually still pretty cold. So this is a picture showing us putting the ROV through the ice in the science tent, and then we can use that ROV to study the wreck. Now, we usually go to this site in August, September when all the ice is gone. And this is the exact same site. And you can see here, this is our barge that we work from and dive from. And if you see here through the water, you can just make out the shipwreck. It's sitting in 15 to 30 feet of water. So on a good day, you can see it right through the water. So another site we work on that's pretty interesting, I think, is Sable Island National Park Reserve. And this one's interesting because it is a small island, 200 kilometers off the shore of Nova Scotia, that has over 300 shipwrecks around it. It's often referred to as the graveyard of the Atlantic because of all the shipwrecks. And this island is neat because it's made out of sand, and the sand shifts and moves over time. And what happens is a shipwreck that'll have hit the shore will often end up being pushed onto the island. So we'll find shipwrecks on land, just like this one. And another really interesting thing about this particular island is that it is filled with wild horses. So as you're excavating these shipwrecks in the sand, the horses get curious and come on over to check it out. We also do a lot of our work in the lakes, rivers, and the canal systems. So this is a picture of the Rideau Canal. We also work in the Trent Severn Waterway. They're both in Ontario. And we'll do surveys and inventories, and the canals have a variety of sites. They've got shipwrecks and old dams and indigenous sites. This is another interesting site, Lake Minnewanka in Alberta. So in this area, this lake is actually up in the mountains. So it's a lot higher than your normal sea level. And what's interesting about this one, if you recall, I mentioned that sometimes a site on land can get covered in water for different reasons. Well, this is an area that used to be more land and was covered in water. So there's actually an underwater town site in this lake. And that town site, you can still see the foundations of some of the buildings around it and a lot of interesting things down there. We don't always work in deep water. Sometimes we work in very shallow water, as you can see here, shallow enough that you can walk around. Or in some cases, you might be able to put on a mask and a snorkel instead of all the heavy dive gear and hop in the water and record an archaeological site. Of course, as amazing as it is that we get to travel and see all of these sites, I think the majority of our work is actually done in the office. So we go out and we find these amazing sites and we collect all of this data, photos, videos, drawings, we'll excavate and get artifacts, but there's a lot of work to do after that with all of that data. We have to catalog the photos, bring the artifacts to the lab to make sure that they're conserved or protected. We have to write reports as well, and of course, analyze all the data and give presentations like this one. So that's just a quick overview of what we do on our team and some of the sites and the tools that we use. Thank you.
All right, Brandy, that was such a great presentation. Obviously there's times when you're in an office, but your other office is pretty darn cool.
Yes.
You get to visit some pretty amazing places in Canada. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn things loose to Q&A very shortly. But before we do, while you were presenting, I pulled together a quick Kahoot quiz behind the scenes. And we're going to give students a chance to play if they're able to from their classroom. So just bear with me for 1 second while it loads. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And we should see something pop up here now. There we go. So if you would like to join us in the Kahoot quiz, you need to go to kahoot.it. Kahoot.it. Then it's going to ask you for a PIN number. So our PIN number today is a nice short one, 56591. So if you want to join us today, the PIN number is 56591. If you happen to have technology at your seat, maybe a tablet or a Chromebook, you could join that way. If not, your teacher could pop this up at the front of the room and you can shout out your answers to him or her. If you're joining from home, you can scan that QR code with a tablet or your phone. It'll bring you right in. And sometimes you just can't join with technology. No big deal. You can still play along and see how you do with the answers. So we'll give it a couple moments to see if we get a few groups in here with us. While we wait, Brandy, the two wrecks that you kind of touched on were two pretty big deals, the Franklin expedition. Can you just maybe tell us a little bit more about that expedition and why it was such a big deal to find those wrecks?
Sure, yes. So the Franklin expedition was an expedition that took place in 1845. Back then, people were not sure if there was a Northwest Passage or a passage above Canada to cross over to get to China. And they were very interested in finding it because it would have been great for trade routes. It would have been a lot shorter than the route they were taking. So in 1845, they put together an expedition that had 2 ships on it. And those ships were outfitted with the best technology they had and fully supplied for at least 3 years. And they set off to the north to find this Northwest Passage, but they were never heard from again. So what had happened was these ships, they got up north and they got stuck in the ice. And the men were able to leave a note in a cairn, which is a pile of rocks, basically, that they built, letting people know that they got stuck in the ice and they are walking south. And that was the last piece of information they were able to find from these men. And for 170 years, people have been looking for these 2 ships, wondering where they ended up. And in 2008, Parks Canada started to look for them. We weren't the first people to look for them. And we involved kind of the local Inuit. They had a lot of stories and a lot of information about where these ships were and where they were last seen. And over several years of working with Inuit and a bunch of different groups, including Canadian Hydrographic Services and the Coast Guard, among many others, these shipwrecks were actually found. And they are both located in the Arctic, and they are in amazing condition. Because of the really cold water, those ships are actually upright. And I showed a few pictures. The pictures that I showed inside of those 2 ships, or like the inside where the bed was, and the bottles, that's the HMS Terror. And the image that I showed of the ship sitting upright on the bottom, that was the Erebus. And the picture at the very beginning of my presentation was actually us excavating inside of HMS Erebus. And we've been working on that excavation since 2016.
Okay. Very, very cool. I think, shipwrecks in water like that, deep, cold. Well, I guess it's not too deep, but it's nice and cold. So the bacteria doesn't get a chance to work on the ships. We did a lot of live events while they were looking for Shackleton's Endeavor. And so that was really cool. And that was obviously a lot deeper, but kind of same principle. Cold water preserves those wrecks beautifully.
Yes, it does.
All right, so we've got some classrooms who have joined us, so let's get in on this action. While we're playing Kahoot as well, I can see questions have already come in the chat, which is great. Keep the questions coming, and we will get to those shortly. But let's play a little Kahoot, and then we'll get into the rest of the action. So first question coming your way. We've got multiple choice, true or false. It is multiple choice. How long has the parks team been exploring and protecting wrecks? Was it 10 years, 30 years, 45 years, or 60 years? So remember, the quicker you put in the right answer, the more points you're going to get. And then, we'll see the leaderboard in between each of our sessions. So that is right. It's about 60 years exploring and preserving wrecks. So the Speedy Yak is holding down that top spot. Let's get to our next question. So true or false coming your way. Diving on shipwrecks started as an effort to recover valuable goods. Is that true or is that false? That it started as a way to recover valuable goods. Got a couple more seconds to lock your answer in. All right. Absolutely true. Very cool. So our scoreboard, the Speedy Yak is holding on strong. We have another true or false coming your way. Archaeological sites, or all sites being explored, are always underwater. Is that true or is that false? That all sites being explored have always been underwater. That's how I want to phrase it. Have always been underwater. You got a few more seconds to lock that answer in. All right. So we know that is false. We know, you mentioned, Brandy, there's sites that are eventually flooded. You mentioned some of those bridges and dams and indigenous sites that we can find underwater, which weren't there originally. All right. Silly Horse taking the lead. We've got one final multiple choice coming your way. Which is an important tool that Brandy uses in the field? So a boat, ROVs, sonar, or all of the above. So which is an important tool that Brandy uses in the field? You've got three options, or of course you have the all of the above option. All right, let's take a look at our final leaderboard. On the podium in third place, we've got the Fuzzy Penguin. In second, the Silly Horse. And holding down that top spot, the Genius Falcon sneaking in at the end. All right, very cool. Well, I am going to shut down this screen share and come back nice front and center. Thanks so much for playing along on the Kahoot with us. Okay, let's get into some Q&A action. So I want to start with, we've got Dalewood students hanging out with us. They're in Hamilton, Ontario. And they want to know, are there any important protocols while you're diving near or searching for a wreck?
Yes. Yep. Do you mean more like safety protocols or?
Judging by a few more questions they have here, I think they're more curious about maybe like their historic sites, kind of more being careful not to damage anything, I think.
Yes, absolutely. We want to have as little impact as possible on a shipwreck. Now, when we first find a wreck, a lot of our recording is through pencil drawings and through photo and video. that has no impact on the wreck, which is good for its preservation. Occasionally, we will do excavations. And when we do that, we are recovering artifacts and bringing them to the surface. But before we pull anything out of the water, we will record its exact location on that shipwreck. We will actually measure in its position, because that can give us a lot of information. And then we take photos of it, and then we will bring it up to the surface. The more information we can get, the better. So if we have any impact on the wreck, we try and make sure that that impact is thoroughly recorded and that that information is available for forever. But ideally, yeah, we want to have as minimal impact as possible.
Okay, great question to get us started. Let's see. Oh, okay. So you were showing that example. This is Safe is asking this question. You were in so much equipment. It looks incredibly heavy. How are you moving down there?
Well, actually, it's very, very heavy when you're on the surface, and you kind of have to waddle yourself to the edge of the boat and get in the water. But once we get in the water, it actually becomes almost neutrally buoyant, which means that you can almost float. All the weight is kind of taking off of your body, and you have just enough so that you can sink down to the wreck, but not so much that it's heavy anymore. And you actually feel pretty free under the water, and you can move around a lot easier.
Cool. Karina is wondering if you can remember the first wreck that you ever explored.
Yes. Yeah, it would have been 30 years ago when I first started diving. I actually started when I was 12 years old. And the first wreck was one in Cardinal, Ontario, called the Conestoga. And that was the first time I ever got to experience a shipwreck. And that was part of our diving course.
All right. Pretty cool. Speaking of diving courses, can you maybe, some students tuning in might be at that age where something like a discovery dive or something like a bubble maker or something might be something they can explore. So, what does it take to be certified to dive?
Okay, well, the first course you can actually start when you're 12. You have to take it with an adult. You have to have a buddy who's an adult. But for the course, all you have to be able to do before you start is you have to be able to swim. You have to be able to tread water for about 5 minutes. And after that, they can start teaching you diving. And the more you learn, the more comfortable you get in the water. So really taking a course just to start, or even doing that introductory dive just to see if it's something you like, is something that's offered in a lot of cities.
All right. Very cool. My guy Finn, he just turned 12. So this summer, that is something that we're going to go and do. So I can take him out to do a little bit of exploring. Very cool. Okay. Alexis would like to know, you've been diving for a long time, exploring wrecks. Anything you've found or discovered that was really interesting or stuck out with you, and why?
Oh, wow. There's so much that I've found and discovered that was interesting. And with every wreck site, there's always something new to find. And let's see, an example might be when we found, whenever you find artifacts under the water that belong to specific individuals, I always find that really interesting. You'd be excavating and you might find a pencil or, just common everyday things, but that you're the first person who's seen that in 200 years. And the person who used to own that had to leave it and get off of that ship as fast as possible. And it's been down there unused, unseen for so long. I always find that really interesting.
Yeah, very cool. And so speaking about the artifacts, I've got a question here about bringing them to the surface. Do you always take stuff? Do you leave stuff? How is that decided?
We don't always take stuff. When we do an excavation, we can't necessarily take everything. So we'll focus our attention on artifacts that can actually provide us with the most information. So artifacts that'll tell us about the people who were on the ship, the activities that they did, how they lived their lives like day to day while on that vessel. So any of those smaller objects that'll give us information about people, or we might focus on artifacts that can teach us about ship construction, or maybe what happened to this ship. Perhaps we don't know how it sank, and we'll look for artifacts that are related to that. So we tend to focus on things that'll teach us the most information for the least amount of impact.
All right. Do you find any wrecks where people have beat you to the wreck? So where, I know myself from diving, there's some wrecks you go and dive and there's just nothing. It's been totally stripped. Has that happened to you with some of the wrecks?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of the wreck sites we work on are open for public diving, and people are encouraged to go and check out those sites. They're really interesting and it's a great experience. But there are laws and regulations that promote zero impact diving. So we're not supposed to take the artifacts. We're not supposed to have any impact on the wreck. Unfortunately, occasionally that does still happen. Or we might find a wreck that, way before these laws existed or before people knew that that's something, we shouldn't be doing, people might have removed artifacts. So yeah, we will often find a wreck site that has had a lot of the objects removed.
All right. A couple questions to wrap up, Brandy. This is from our students in Hamilton again. Two-parter. Does anybody own the wrecks in Canada, and do you need permissions or permits?
So there are different laws for the different provinces or for federal water. So the wrecks will be under the jurisdiction of whatever province they're found in, or if they're in federal water, the government of Canada. If they are actually Navy vessels, they technically still belong to the country they came from. So for the Erebus and Terror, those are British Navy ships. So they actually belonged to England. And we had to create a memorandum of understanding where they actually gave Canada those shipwrecks and the artifacts on it before we were allowed to keep anything that we found there or to actually excavate them. So yes, there is still ownership. You do need special permits to do archaeology underwater from the province that you're in or from the government. And that includes if you're studying, recording, or excavating a wreck. But for scuba diving, generally speaking, no. Most wrecks are open and available for you to explore. There are only a handful that are restricted for scuba diving, and those ones tend to be more like the Edmunds Fitzgerald, Hamilton, and Scourge in Lake Ontario. Those are grave sites, so they're a little bit different. But other than that, no, everybody's pretty much allowed to go and check out the wreck sites.
All right. Final question for you, Brandy, and that is, where are you heading next? Do you have some more field work coming up?
Yes, we are currently starting to plan our field season, and right now my next project will be at Sable Island. We're going to go back to Sable Island and do some more recording of some of the shipwrecks, because as I mentioned, that island, the shipwrecks get pushed up on shore, but they get covered in sand, and then sometimes they're exposed and open, and it changes year to year. So we could go back every year and find entirely new wrecks we didn't even know were there. So we'll be doing that in May.
All right. Awesome. Well, I want to start off with a shout out to our classrooms. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Thanks for sending in those great questions and playing Kahoot. And a shout out to the classrooms who will catch the recording later. And then Brandy, thank you so much. Thanks for letting us steal a little time and taking us into the world of archaeology and the ships beneath the surface.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Lots of events still coming up this week. We hope to see you in some of those. But for now, we're going to sign off. So thanks, everyone.